We're going to begin the very first day of creating a sourdough culture, what most would call either the sourdough, the mother, the levain. These are all terms that are used, the seed. What it is this is going to be what is going to be when you say naturally leavened breads. It is because you've created a sourdough culture, and that's going to take us about 5 or 6 days to create it at least stable enough to use and also have the proper level of acidity. But then it's going to take probably another week of consistently going through what we call a feeding cycle for that to maintain itself and then kind of stabilize completely. So today all it is merely mixing flour and water and letting it do what it's supposed to do. So I'm just going to take a small little container. I've got this little guy right here. And on my scale, I've used grams most of the time. And so today it's in grams. When you put anything on the scale itself, you also need to make sure that you clear it, put it to 0. We call it tearing it. And so make sure after you do that, you tear it. So now it's at 0, all right? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put 75 grams of water in here and then 75 grams of whole wheat flour, okay? 100% whole wheat flour. It's going to be the best way to kind of kickstart any of this kind of culture. So we will eventually convert it over to a white flour culture and or just maintain it at a whole wheat culture as well. You can create a rye culture. We can do anything we want. But initially what I'm going to do today is just start what is going to eventually become my white sourdough culture. All right. So room temperature water, approximately 75 degrees, even on up to 80 degrees would be more than enough. Thankfully, I live in the Tampa Bay, Florida area, so my water coming out is pretty much about that temperature. If you do need to, I didn't show you, but get a thermometer. The reason you need is that you can't just put cold water in, you can't just put hot water in. It needs to be in a certain range. So if you're not confident by being able to know approximately the temperature, please do get a thermometer out and use that. When we do start mixing doughs and we start going through that process, I will be using a thermometer as well, because not only for the water, not only for the mixing, but also post-mixing what the dough temperature is, all right? So today, this water is at about 75 degrees right now, and I'm just looking for 75 grams. All right. Tear it again. All right, and then I'm just going to put some whole wheat flour in there right now. This wasn't pre-measured, so this is actually just me measuring it. Perfect. I'm just using a spoon. You can use your fingers, your hand. We will be doing most things by hand, so eventually that's going to be the case. But since it's such a small container, I just use my hand. Now, so this is the same amount of water as the same amount of flour. So depending on the container you have, you can do 50 grams and 50 grams. You can do 100 grams and 100 grams. It's just a ratio. It's a 1-to-1 ratio that we're going to be doing today. All right. After you mix this, okay, and you're going to let it sit overnight, and you're going to check it tomorrow. Here I was able to start a culture last week, which I'll show you in future episodes, that it only took me about 3 days to really get this thing going. But after the very first day, this thing was most definitely getting active, okay? Very cool thing. You don't need to buy any commercial yeast. This is merely just adding flour and water, and the natural bacteria that's in the air is available to you to use. All right. We will go into again, much more explanation as to what our sourdough cultures in other episodes, but this is just for today's introductory instructional video. So there we go. And that's it. This is going to sit, okay, room temperature. I would put a plate under it, okay? I'm not going to use this plate, but let's say using that as a plate. Put it under there because there is a potential over the next day and even on the second day when we do feed it a second time that this may be overflowing. So just in case your container's not large enough, That way it doesn't kind of dirty up your cabinet. All right, thank you. All right, so today we're going to do the second feeding of the beginning stages of building a sourdough culture. 2 days ago, I fed 75 grams of whole wheat organic flour and 75 grams of water, and then just let it ferment as its own. And basically all that little bit of bacteria that is captured both in the air and in the flour has done an amazing job of starting to kind of build this up. And you can see that it came up and over, and it has all this kind of wonderful little, activity going on. So I'm going to go into a larger container this time, and we are going to take 50 grams of this budding culture, add it to another 50 grams of water, and then 50 grams of whole wheat flour. This is an organic flour, and I would continue to use organic flours, especially while making the culture, and beyond, of course. But you know that it's a clean flour, so it's not going to have anything that can inhibit the growth of the bacteria. So, things such as bleach. All right, so I've already pre-scaled to 50 grams of water, and we're just going to take, and you can see all this looks really cool. 50 grams here. All right, and then we're going to also add 50 grams of flour. But before I do that, I just want to kind of break this down a little bit, just so it makes it easier to mix. Okay, and you can actually see, just when you do this, all the little gas and activity going on. All right, so now 50 grams of flour. Perfect. And then again, all we're going to do is mix this up and make sure that it's fully incorporated. You can use your hand or a spoon, doesn't really matter. And now that I know that this is quite active, I've gone to the larger container, so I'm not going to have it spill out. All right. All right, so we are now going to go into our third feeding, the third stage of creating a sourdough culture. The first stage, what we did is we took 75 grams of whole wheat flour, 75 grams of water, and I let it sit for 48 hours. Then we fed it that day, on the third day, for another 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour, and 50 grams of the culture. And that was again with whole wheat flour. What we're going to do now is take what we've started yesterday, so on the second stage, this is starting to actually ferment in the way that we want, but it's still going to take a few more days to do. Got 100 grams of water, and I'm going to put 100 grams of the culture in there. So far, I wouldn't say it smells good, but it will eventually once everything starts to get balanced. Right now there's not any true balance in the bacteria growth. Okay, so we have 100 grams there. Just kind of break it up a little bit. And then today, and I can actually start to see some of that, the gas retention, some of that yeast development coming through, and so it's got a little bit of air bubbles coming in. What we're going to do, instead of doing 100% whole wheat flour, we're going to have 50 grams of white flour and 50 grams of whole wheat flour. All right, and all we're going to do is, just as we've done before, mix this together, and it's going to ferment overnight, and we will carry on with our fourth stage, the fourth feeding of this. And in a few more feedings after that, it will start to stabilize and then become something that we would actually start to make bread with. All right, so we're now in the fourth stage, the fourth day of feeding to create a sourdough culture. And this is starting to come along as something that we're going to use here shortly, maybe another 3-4 days total. All right, so you can see that it's starting to ferment, and you can see that there is the activity of the yeast. And if you were here to smell this, you'd also smell the bacteria and the overall fermentation that's coming from that. A few more days, a few more stages, and then into a regular feeding cycle, and we'll be good to go. So what we have, as we had done, we're just basically going to repeat what we did on the third day. 100 grams of water, about 75 degrees is best, even on up to 78, 80 even. And I'm going to take 100 grams of our building and budding culture. Okay. This will be discarded, all right? There's no need to keep this, but this is what it means to have a feeding cycle, and then the what we call the seed, this being the seed that's going to be fed into making a larger amount. So I'm just kind of going to break this down a little bit. And it should start to smell like a vinegar smell, and eventually it'll turn into a nice tasting vinegar smell. And we're going to do 50 grams of white flour. And again, these are organic flours. It's not essential, but it's a benefit to do that, not only just for the health benefits, but also for the fact that it could, if it's been bleached, obviously bromated, but that it would inhibit the building of the culture. So again, 50 grams whole wheat, 50 grams white flour. And depending how it looks tomorrow will be whether we're able to go to full white flour. All right, so we're just going to take this, we're just going to mix it together as we had in the past, put it on, and then tomorrow we'll be into our fifth stage of development. All right, now we're on the fifth day of creating a sourdough culture. We're in the sixth day total. It's been a very nice progression, and currently this culture is getting extremely active and is now going to start to go into, beginning tomorrow, into a 2-cycle feeding per day. So today, when I open this up, and it's been 24 hours again, it just looks wonderful, and it's actually starting to really get a nice smell. It's not having that kind of off taste or off smell. It's now starting to balance. So as you can see in the culture itself, it is really, really active, and it's much more, just as you'll see the progression from day 1 through day 5 now, that it has caught the yeast, it's caught the bacteria, it's now starting to create a balance. And now what we're going to do is go into a feeding, but I'm going to create 2 cultures from this one seed, and I'll show you that right now. So each of these containers have 100 grams of water, and what we're going to do is continue to feed as we did yesterday with 50 grams of whole wheat, 50 grams of white flour, and I want to keep and maintain it as that. I call it my wheat liquid levain. And that gives me an opportunity to create a whole different variety of breads that have a much different flavor and an overall just a robustness that I really like from it. And that'll be basically, like I said, the exact same thing as we did yesterday, but then it's going to go into a 2 feeding per day. And we're also going to, with the other 100 grams of water, do an entirely white flour culture, still using this as the seed, but then it's going to turn into a completely white culture as we feed it. Again, it'll be 2 feedings per day, so it's a commitment that has to come with it. And there are ways to slow it down and then continue to feed it when you need it. But for right now, what we're doing is just trying to build it, so we really need to maintain that schedule as it is. All right, so for the first one, since these are becoming active and that this culture is now getting its own strength and its own character, instead of it being the same amount of the culture, the seed, to be fed into the flour, it's now going to be cut down to half of that. So it's now going to be 50 grams of the seed that's going to be fed with 100 grams of flour and 100 grams of water. And then eventually, that'll actually go lower and lower and lower. Generally, I get it down for a wheat culture anywhere from 10 to 20% of the whole flour, or for the white flour, about 20% of the flour weight against the white culture. So here we go for 50 grams here. Okay, so 100 grams water, 50 grams new culture, new seed, and now it's going to be 50 grams of the whole wheat. And 50 grams of white flour. So as I said, this is maintaining the same composition as we did to build it, but now it is going to be consistently fed twice a day. All right, so just mix this up like we had with the other. Now with the other 100 grams of water and another 50 grams of the seed, we're going to turn this into a white flour-based levain. This is what I just refer to as my white liquid levain. Okay. The remaining does get discarded again. These now are going to be what you're going to carry on with. This will be just trash. Okay. So now instead of splitting it 50-50 with the whole wheat and the white, we're just going to go to white. And this over, a few more feedings is going to be strictly a white-based seed. All right. So we just mix it the same way, go through the same process as we have in the beginning, and then tomorrow it's going to be a 2 feedings per day, which is okay. So we have actually finally created our sourdough cultures, which is going to be enough for us to start making bread. We had gone into, as of today, or actually yesterday, but to show you today, a 2 feeding cycle, which was 100% flour, 100% water, and then I reduced it down to 25% of the sour culture, the seed. All right. One of them, I split the flour into half whole wheat into half white that we'd then been doing as we built it. And then the other, I went to straight white flour. So now I have 2 cultures, 2 different flavors, 2 different ways to make bread. And I'll show you right here. So on the left, you're going to see the whole wheat liquid levain that we've been making. And then on the right is the white liquid levain that we took the seed from that on the left to make the one on the right. And they're now both at a consistent fermentation and a consistent rate. And as we do this each and every day, twice a day, you will have a sourdough culture that can make a variety of breads.